Hello, everyone. Today I'll be talking about the ethics of consciousness. That's my research topic, and I'll provide you with an introduction to it. So let's get started. So what is consciousness in the first place? What do philosophers mean by consciousness? Well, philosophers by consciousness usually mean the subjective qualitative properties of experience that are lost during a dreamless sleep. So while you're in a dreamless sleep, you are incapable of having the visual experience of red, for example. You are incapable of feeling pain, to smell coffee, and all these qualitative experiences. These are part of your conscious experience. And that's what I will mean by phenomenal consciousness. In a sense, by phenomenal consciousness, I simply mean experience. So smell, feelings, perceptions, everything you get when you wake up in the morning, in a sense. And another way to understand what consciousness is to talk about the what is it like question. So, for example, you can ask, what is it like to be a bat? Or what is it like to be a rabbit? But it doesn't make sense. It doesn't really make sense to ask, what is it like to be a table? Or what is it like to be a chair? Or what is it like to be a rock? There is nothing it is like to be a rock. Just because a rock is not capable of consciousness, it's not capable of phenomenal experience, it's not capable of a subjective point of view. And many philosophers believe that consciousness is, in a way, intrinsically valuable, is non-instrumentally valuable, in the sense that it matters for its own sake. It doesn't matter because by getting consciousness, you can get something else. It's not like money, but it's something that matters in itself, at least on some views. So it is a potential argument for the idea that consciousness is intrinsically valuable. So imagine this case, imagine this thought experiment. A procedure permanently removes your phenomenal consciousness while preserving most of your behavioral states. So like the most skilled somnambule, in the deepest dreamless sleep, you carry out your everyday activities, but you don't experience anything from within. You are a bit like a zombie. Philosophers by zombie mean a creature that behaves just like us. This creature can talk, this creature can move around, this creature can write a paper, they can give a talk, but there is nothing it is like to be them. There is no inner mental life. So imagine that you undergo this procedure. It doesn't seem to be great. It seems pretty bad for you. Phenolactomy doesn't seem neither better nor worse than death. If a god or a stranger were to take care of your posthumous interests, for example, imagine that a stranger after you die will take care of your family, will take care of your daughter, and so on and so forth. Well, phenolactomy seems pretty bad. It seems to deprive you of everything you value intrinsically about your life, in such a way that if a god or a stranger were to help you out after you die, then more or less you'll be in the same situation. Well, if that's the case, one argument goes, the capacity for conscious experience is necessary for a creature to have intrinsic value, to have a life that matter morally in and of itself. So consciousness really matters. If we are to lose it, we are to lose everything that we value intrinsically about our life. That's the point of this thought experiment. But there are two possible objections to it. So the first objection is that, well, okay, some conscious experiences are pretty good, like the experience of joy, the experience of great friendship, the experience of love. The other experiences are just bad. Think about excruciating pain. Think about the experience of depression. So why should consciousness as such be intrinsically positively valuable, even though there is this symmetry between good experiences and bad experiences? Why shouldn't we say that consciousness is just intrinsically disvaluable? So that's one first worry of phenolactomy, the kind of case I made before. So there is also another worry That is to say, well, imagine two universes, two worlds, in which there is only a single creature, nothing else. There is only one single creature in this whole universe. So in the first world, a creature has a maximally simple conscious experience without any pleasure and pain. So, for example, this creature is only capable of seeing light brightness, like staring at a blank wall. There is nothing else to it. And in the second world, there is a creature that is not conscious at all. It's in a dreamless sleep. Well, one may ask, is either of these worlds better than the other? If consciousness is intrinsically valuable, the first world, where there is some kind of consciousness, should be much better than the other. But it doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. A world where there is only an experience of slight brightness doesn't seem particularly valuable. At least that's a possible objection that one can make. And if that's the case, consciousness as such is neutrally valuable, other than being intrinsically valuable. So let's talk about consciousness and well-being now. Well, maybe consciousness, rather than being intrinsically good, is what makes one capable of well-being, is what makes one a welfare subject. So by welfare in philosophy, we just mean well-being. And by well-being, we mean what is good or bad for a subject, what is good or bad for a person, what is good or bad for an animal. And in general, by welfare subjectivity, we just mean that the kind of entity that is capable of enjoying benefits and suffering harms, in the sense of things can be good or bad for the entity itself. That life can go badly or can go better. There is a life that can go better or worse. So take the Mona Lisa, for example. The Mona Lisa might have intrinsic value. Many people believe that artworks have intrinsic value, but surely it's not a welfare subject. Surely, so it's good for us to experience the Mona Lisa, but it's not good for the Mona Lisa to have certain aesthetics properties. There is nothing that is good or bad for the Mona Lisa. So on this view, if you think that consciousness is what makes one a welfare subject, well, only conscious creatures are capable of welfare goods and bads, such as only conscious creatures such as people and non-human animals, and plants, machines, or corporations are not welfare subjects. There's nothing that can be good or bad for them. And this view addresses the symmetry problem we discussed before, and also explains our intuition towards phenolectomy. Because, well, by undergoing phenolectomy, we lose the capacity for welfare subjectivity. We lose the capacity for anything to be good or bad for our life, and which is pretty important. Some philosophers have a very different view, though. Some philosophers believe that there can be well-being even without conscious experience. They think that consciousness is not necessary for welfare subjectivity. And the argument goes like this. They say, well, for any view in which welfare consists of X, we can say that an entity Y is a welfare subject Y, if Y is capable of X. So the idea is that welfare subjectivity, whether a creature is capable of well-being, depends on what we mean by well-being. And what we mean by well-being depends on our theory of well-being, what we believe it is good or bad for a creature. And on some theories of well-being, there are the so-called extra-experientialist welfare goods. So these are things that are good or bad to us, that, however, are outside of our experiences. They're not like joy, they're not like pleasure or pain, that are constitutive parts of our experience. Rather, they're outside of it, they're independent of our experience. So, for example, on these theories of welfare, desire satisfaction matter. So, for example, let's say that I desire for my partner never to cheat on me. And let's say that my partner does cheat on me all the time, and I never find out about it, I never learn, so I never get an experience of my partner cheating. It never becomes part of my conscious life. Still, we may believe my desire is not satisfied. My desire is frustrated. And because of this, my partner is harming them. He's making my life worse than it could have been. And if you have this intuition that my partner is harming me, even though I never learn about it, even though it never becomes part of my conscious experience, then if you have this kind of view, you believe that there are extra-experientialist welfare goods. And other examples are knowledge and achievement. And that is that if there are extra-experientialist welfare goods, why there shouldn't also be non-conscious welfare subjects? So let's make two examples here. The first example are posthumous harms. Posthumous harms are harms that occur after our death. They are harms to the dead. So let's imagine, for example, that I spent my whole life writing a book. This book is the most important thing to me. It's everything I care about, everything I've ever cared about. And on my deathbed, I didn't really manage to finish my book. So I asked my best friend, please finish the last page of his book and publish it under my name. My best friend promised to me that he's gonna publish my book after I die. But as soon as I die, my friend published this book under his name. Am I harmed? Is my friend harming me somehow? Well, some people believe that even though I'm dead, even though I'm not capable of consciousness anymore, that's still bad for me. And so in this case, we have a non-conscious welfare subject. Dead people could be non-conscious welfare subjects. Another example are future AIs. So in the future, we may be able to build AIs that are capable of desires, but are not capable of conscious experiences. And this may seem like a strange idea, but on some scientific theories of desires and on some theories of philosophy of mind, people believe that desires are a matter of functional states, certain kind of causal interactions between mental states, and they don't necessarily involve a conscious experience. They don't necessarily. And if that's the case, then we can think of cases where desires and consciousness comes apart. So for example, to make an example, think about non-conscious desires. All of us have non-conscious desires, or one may think that. And these desires, they never become part of our experiences, if not indirectly. And still, satisfy these non-conscious desires may be good for us. Similarly, in the case of these possible future AIs, satisfy their desires could be good for them, even though we're never conscious of a desire satisfaction. So these are possible points that philosophers have been making. There are, of course, some replies, some possible replies to the idea that there can be welfare without consciousness. One is just to say that the argument could run in the opposite direction. Since unconscious AIs don't look like welfare subjects, you may think that there's just no way that a non-conscious AI could be capable of well-being. You may think something like, you may think that for your life to go bad or to go badly or good for you or well for you, you must have at least have a point of view on your life. And without this, it doesn't make sense to think of welfare subjectivity. If you have this kind of view, then you may think that we should reject non-experientialist theories of welfare in virtue of the fact that they allow for non-conscious welfare subjects. Or alternatively, you could accept a theory of welfare according to which the capacity for consciousness is necessary for welfare goods, but not all welfare goods consist in experiences. So the idea is that every welfare good as a part, as a component that is conscious, but is not exhausted by the conscious content.
Yeah,
so, for example, the idea is that a good life consists in consciousness plus desire satisfaction. You need to be capable of consciousness plus your desires being satisfied, or having an extensive knowledge, or making great achievements. But you need the capacity for consciousness in the first place for the extra experientialist elements to make a difference. Let's talk about moral status. This is another topic where consciousness is relevant, is very important. So moral status is a core concept in practical ethics, is a core concept in animal ethics and many other areas. And it's a shorthand for saying that a creature of interest that matter morally in and of themselves. So moral status is somehow connected to welfare subjectivity. Many philosophers believe that welfare subjectivity is necessary and sufficient for moral status, in the sense that if a creature is incapable of well-being, then it can't possibly have moral status. And if a creature is capable of well-being, then it must have at least some kind of moral status. It would be strange to say that a creature can be harmed or benefited, but doesn't matter morally, right? So there is a sense in which moral status and welfare subjectivity are very closely connected, but I'm going to treat here the concept separately. So many people believe that moral status requires the capacity for consciousness. The rocks don't have moral status, the tables don't have moral status, but people and non-human animals have some kind of moral status. We may ask whether moral status requires the general property of being phenomenally conscious, or rather a particular kind of consciousness. Whether it's just the general capacity for consciousness that matters. So maybe you need some specific kind, some specific type of conscious experience. So let's come back to phenolectomy. Phenolectomy strips our life away of many types of experiences, right? We lose the capacity to experience pleasure. We lose the capacity to see, the capacity to hearing, the capacity not for smelling, but for tasting. We also lose the capacity for more sophisticated sorts of experiences, such as intentionality, agency, and even perhaps that of understanding. So, which is the mind that matters here? Are all of these properties matters? Is it a specific subset of consciousness that matters? So this is the question. And there is an important distinction in the literature between consciousness and sentience. So narrow sentientism, for example, is the view that only beings that are capable of affective consciousness have moral status. Affective consciousness is just another way to say sentience, which is the capacity for conscious experiences with a positive or negative valence tone. The capacity for conscious experiences that feel good or bad, such as pleasure, pain, and emotions. Okay, so we have sentience, which is not any kind of consciousness, but just that kind of consciousness that feel good or bad to us. And it's a widespread view, the idea that, well, you need the capacity to pleasure and pain to matter morally. You need the capacity to pleasure and pain to have moral status. Since Bentham, centuries ago, this has been like probably the standard view in animal ethics. There is an alternative view, though. David Chalmers recently has challenged the plausibility of narrow sentientism or affective sentientism by appealing to philosophical Vulcans. So I suppose some of you may watch Star Trek. I'm talking about those Vulcans in a sense, but I'm also talking, rather than just talking about those Vulcans, I'm talking about an extreme version of them. So Vulcans in Star Trek are highly sophisticated conscious creatures, just like humans. They can do mathematics, they're capable of agency, they have intentions, they have values, but they don't have capacity for pleasure, pain, and emotions. In Star Trek, they can experience pleasure and pain and emotions, at least in certain cases and at least in certain moments of their life. But let's imagine a more extreme version, instead of Vulcans, philosophical Vulcans that are entirely incapable of any degree of balanced experience. And well, if you're a narrow scientist, you need to deny that these creatures have moral status. But on Chalmers' view, he thinks that this is wrong. He thinks that, for example, killing a Vulcan would be monstrous. It couldn't possibly be permissible, because, I mean, we'll see that in a bit. In general, he thinks that Vulcans shows that broad sentientism rather than narrow sentientism is true. And on this view, phenomenal consciousness is enough for moral status on its own, even without capacity for pleasure, pain, and emotions. So Chalmers, that's the way Chalmers understands philosophical Vulcans. They might still have a rich conscious life, he says, with multimodal sensory experiences and a stream of conscious thought about all sorts of complex issues. They may want advanced science and to help those around them. They experience no pleasure when anticipating or achieving these goals, but they value and pursue the goals all the same. So he believes Vulcans have a rich conscious life. He believes that they're capable of knowledge, and they may want to desire to advance science. They don't experience pleasure and pain, but they still have values, and they want to pursue those values with a strong kind of intentionality. So you may want to deny some of his claims. I don't believe in some of his claims myself. One of the tricky bits is, well, if you are incapable of emotions, can you really value goals all the same? If you're not emotionally attached to people, goals, and your desires, are you really valuing these goals, these people, or these desires all the same? Well, you may be skeptical of that point. So there are a few questions that are worth asking here. So the first question is, what would it be like to have a conscious life deprived of all sorts of affective experience? So what would it be like to be a Vulcan? It's difficult for us to imagine the subjective point of view of an affectless life, of a life completely deprived of pleasure, pain, and any kind of emotion whatsoever. And we may want to ask, which kind of desires and knowledge would a philosophical Vulcan be capable of? Are they capable of the kind of desires and knowledge that matter morally, or maybe are capable only of other kinds of desires and knowledge that they don't matter as much? And in general, could such a mental life be harmed? Could it be benefited? And this is more than a thought experiment. The philosophical Vulcan is more than a mere thought experiment, in my view. Again, future AIs could potentially be capable of experiencing perceptual consciousness. They could be capable of thought as well. But maybe it's more difficult to build an AI capable of emotions, feelings, pleasure, and pain. And if that's the case, we might get a future AI capable of phenomenal consciousness, but incapable of balanced consciousness. And we need to think about the moral status of these creatures. And there are even some real-world species where affective consciousness and phenomenal consciousness may come apart. Some biologists, for example, believe that spiders are an example, even though I have to say it's controversial. I'm not really sure whether there is no, I can say, conclusive evidence about real-world species on this matter. And then there are also cases of anhedonia. Anhedonia is a condition where the subject becomes incapable of a positive affect. Maybe not entirely incapable, but surely the affect is strongly reduced. For example, these people become incapable of experiencing the kind of emotions they used to experience, become incapable of joy, happiness, and enjoyment of any kind in the way they used to. So the affect in general is greatly reduced. There are some dissimilarities, I have to say, between the philosophical Vulcans and cases of anhedonia. People with anhedonia, for example, are still very often capable of pain, and they think of themselves as depressed persons. So they're still capable of negative affects, even though the positive affect is reduced. Another difference is that they used to experience positive affect and they still can remember what was it like to have that affect. Another experience is that usually cases of anhedonia are solvable in the long run. It's something that can be cured, while in the case of philosophy of Vulcan, well, that's just their nature. So let's move to the last topic, degrees of consciousness, degrees of conscious experiences. Well, intuitively, certain creatures matter morally more than others. For example, many people think that a shrimp matters less than a rabbit, but a rabbit matters less than a chimp, and a chimp matters less than a human. Think about, for example, a rescue situation where you can only save one of these two creatures. Many of us will choose to save the chimp over the rabbit and the human over the chimp if you can't save both. What to think about this kind of hierarchical view? So on the left, you see a book written by Shelley Kagan on how to count animals, and it's all about these interspecies moral status comparisons. So I highly recommend to read the book if you are interested in this kind of topic, how to make these interspecies comparisons of well-being and moral significance more generally. So what I want to say right now is that the hierarchical view is not necessarily speciesist. These differences in moral status or in welfare capacities are not necessarily due to species membership, but they may be due to intrinsic properties to those creatures that have nothing to do with species membership. For example, we can think that this hierarchical view could be based on different degrees of conscious experience. The idea is that perhaps the more conscious a creature is, the more intrinsic value the creature accrues. Just as the value of gold is a function of its quantity, the value of a conscious experience could also be a function of the degree of consciousness. So what is degree of consciousness, though? What do we mean? So how should we understand this notion? Some philosophers just deny the possibility of degrees of consciousness. They believe it's an all or nothing matter. Either you have a subjective point of view, or you don't have a subjective point of view. Either you are capable of experience, or you're not capable of experience. But I think we could understand degrees of consciousness as a function of phenomenal richness and phenomenal variety. By phenomenal richness, I mean how many phenomenal properties you can experience at a time within one single experience. There are some experiences that are more complex and some experiences that are simpler than others. And this surely varies across different species and across different creatures. Such that, for example, a human experience could be richer or more complex than the experience of a shrimp, for example. Even though, I mean, I don't have, there are not, this is not an empirical fact, but it seems at least a common sense assumption. And then another important feature of our conscious experience is phenomenal variety. How many different phenomena states, how many different conscious experiences you can have over time. So you can think that degrees of consciousness, you can understand degrees of consciousness as a sort of a function between these two properties, which varies in terms of degrees, which both comes in degrees. But if you believe this, then there are some problematic cases. Well, we have different degrees of experience, even across human beings. Think about severely cognitively impaired human beings. Many of them don't have the same kind of experience that we do. They lack the capacity for certain emotional capacities, or for over high order cognitive capacities. Or think about future possible superconscious AIs and cognitively enhanced individuals. Some of them they could be able to experience much more than we do right now. Potentially, a superconscious AI in the future, as far as I know, could be capable of experience everything that all human beings that ever existed have experienced. So let's imagine that you look at the history of humankind, you take all the experiences of every human being, and you merge all of the experiences together within one single mind. Should we say that this mind, this mind is more important than the mind of an ordinary human being, but we should value it more than us? So this is a possible question. In general, there is a tension between a hierarchical approach to the value of different minds and human equality. So let's go to the conclusion. So consciousness is of immense moral importance. It is perhaps what matters the most in the universe. After all, without consciousness, there are no points of view. A world without consciousness is a world full of darkness. There are a number of questions regarding whether consciousness is intrinsically valuable, whether it is necessary for welfare, whether it comes in degrees, and other important topics. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts about these questions and their ethical implications. Thank you for listening.